My name is Ada Merrick. I'm 29 years old, and this past Christmas, my father looked me dead in the eye and called me a fool for hanging on to a present my grandmother had handed me. The present was a check for $5 million. He ripped his own to pieces. My mother ripped hers. My sister let hers slip into the fireplace and filmed it burning. My brother wadded his up under the table like a candy wrapper. I was the only one who slid mine into my purse and simply said, "Thank you." The following morning, a bank manager bolted the door behind us, sat me down, and spoke 4 words I will never be able to forget. My family spent the rest of that year clawing to reclaim the very thing they'd laughed at, and what they were willing to do to get it overturned rewrote everything I thought I understood about my own blood. Before we go any further, if this is your kind of story, subscribe to Quiet Justice Stories and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I read every one of them. Now let me carry you back to Christmas Eve, to the very last dinner my grandmother ever cooked. My grandmother never once locked her front door, not in 47 years, and that December, the house carried the exact scent it had carried the first time I ever came to visit, back when I was 4. Oakwood smoke drifting off the fireplace, banana bread cooling on the butcher block, and beneath all of it something faintly bitter, something I couldn't put a name to until much later. I climbed the hill in my old Subaru with a paper sack of apples from the tree I'd planted out behind my rental, and she met me at the door in her corn yellow sweater and the apron she'd worn since the day her hip first started aching. She kissed my forehead the way she always did, one hand cupped along my jaw, like she was making certain I was still the same person underneath. "Tell me about your class," she said. She said it every Saturday, and every Saturday she meant it. We sat at the kitchen table with our mismatched teacups, and I told her about Oliver, a 3rd grader who wouldn't say a word in group work but could write paragraphs that left me a little unsteady. She listened with her whole face. She asked what I thought Oliver needed. I said patience. She said, "Then give him Saturdays." I told her about the bed I'd bought at the flea market, a spindle frame with a drawer gone missing, and she laughed into her tea and decided it was surely haunted by some farmer who'd have disapproved of my reading habits. Her hand trembled a little when she set the cup back down. I pretended I hadn't noticed. We knitted a while. She was working on something small and gray she refused to let me see. I was making a poor job of finishing a scarf I'd started back in October. Outside the window, the cardinal she fed came down to the feeder, took a single seed, and left the way he always did. She watched him like he was someone she'd been waiting on. When I left, she pressed a thick envelope into my hand on the porch. Inside were 2 crisp $10 bills for gas. She gave me that same envelope every month, and I never once cashed it. I kept them in a shoebox under my bed because whatever she was handing me, it was not gas money. I didn't know it then, but that was the 3rd to last Saturday afternoon I would ever get with her. I drove back down the hill whistling. My mother never called me to ask how I was. She called to tell me how she was, to find out what I had, and to decide whether she needed a piece of it. She caught me on the drive home, 10 miles out of town, my turn signal ticking like a small metronome inside the dashboard. "Ada, honey, are you up seeing the old lady again?" That was what my mother called my father's mother. Never Grandma, never Vivian. The old lady. "I go on Saturdays, Mom, every Saturday." She sighed the way she sighed when she wanted me to feel unreasonable. "She's fine, sweetheart. She's got her pension." My older brother Wesley was there with her. I could hear him chewing something. "Ada, I need a ride to Ray's garage Monday. Truck's out again. I have class Monday, Wesley. So, afternoon then. My sister Sienna texted me while I was still on the phone. She lived an hour off in a bigger town, married to a husband she posted about and hardly ever mentioned otherwise. Hey babe, can you float me $200 just this week? I'll hit you back, promise. 3 emojis. My mother talked straight over the silence. Christmas dinner. Your father wants roast. Make sure she doesn't cook for hours this year, Ada. She wears herself out and then she just sits there staring at us. Not one of them asked whether my grandmother was feeling all right. Not one asked whether her hip had gotten worse. Not one asked why her hand might be shaking when she poured the tea. And I realized I'd been sitting there quietly, waiting on the off chance any of them might. On a snow-wet county road, I made a small decision I wouldn't explain to myself until much later. I'll see you Christmas Eve, I said. And Ada. My mother's voice dropped into the register she used for advice. Don't let her rope you into moving in with her. She's got her pride, but she'll take advantage of yours. I clicked off. My father hadn't even been on the line, but I could hear him anyway, the way you can hear a clock ticking in a house you grew up in. For years he'd been warning me not to let his mother dupe me. He used words like dupe. In 29 years, I had never once watched my grandmother try to dupe a living soul. The first thing my grandmother ever asked me to promise her was not to save her life. It was to keep her secret. She told me on a Saturday at the tail end of October, out in her garden while we cut back the rosemary for winter. The light was low and orange, the kind you only get in a garden tended by the same hands for 40 years. She set the shears down on the bench and lowered herself onto it heavier than usual. You remember Dr. Adeyemi? She said. I went to see her Tuesday. I waited. I'd learned a long time ago that my grandmother told you things in her own time, and trying to hurry her along was like trying to hurry a tomato. Pancreatic, she said. Stage 4. I've known since July. The bench felt like it tipped. I didn't cry. I don't know why. Some part of me, I think, had known for months. The way you sense a season ending before a single leaf falls. Chemo? I asked. She shook her head. No. I'd rather spend what I have left out here in this garden, at the kitchen table with you on Saturdays, not hooked to a drip. Grandma, I'm 82, Ada. I've had a very long, very interesting life. She took my hand. Her fingers were cold but steady. I'm not sad. I'm sorting. She pinched off a sprig of rosemary and pressed it into my palm. The smell of it has never really left me since. I have one thing to ask you, she said. Don't tell them. Grandma, I want Christmas to be Christmas. I don't want it turned into a deathbed. I don't want your father drafting his eulogy at the table. She half smiled. I want roast chicken and bad wine. I want one more year of pretending he's the man I raised. Then that old glint came up in her eye, the one that always meant she was about to say something that would leave a mark. Besides, she said, I've got a few things to hand out first. It's going to be a very interesting Christmas. I didn't sleep that night. 5 days later was Thanksgiving. A month later was Christmas. And nothing she said was ever an accident. Every single member of my family walked into my grandmother's house that Christmas Eve, carrying a shopping list in their head disguised as affection. My father came in first, stamping the snow off his boots like a man staking a claim to the room. Gordon Merrick had the kind of posture that had carried him through 30 years at the machine parts plant and would, within 3 months, no longer be enough to keep him employed there. He hung his coat on the good hook. He opened the fridge without asking. My mother followed, already complimenting things. "Oh, the tree looks darling this year." She wasn't admiring it. She was appraising it. I watched her eyes travel across the garlands and the silver star my grandfather had soldered together back in 1974, and I could see her counting. Wesley brought a girlfriend who looked 18 and wasn't, and he barely acknowledged our grandmother. He did say hello to me. "Still teaching those kids, huh? When are you going to get a real job?" He grinned like it was a joke. It wasn't a joke, but it wasn't quite cruel either, which was somehow worse. Sienna arrived last, phone already raised, filming for her followers. "Cozy grandma vibes, my loves. You have to see this fireplace." She didn't hug our grandmother. She kissed the air by her cheek and went right back to her angles. My grandmother moved slowly from the stove to the table in her corn-yellow sweater. She didn't say much. She watched her family with that calm, attentive expression I'd seen her wear across 30 years of gatherings, the look of a woman who'd long since stopped being surprised. She caught my eye once, and she smiled, and she looked like she was in on a joke with somebody who hadn't arrived yet. Beatrice Lund, my grandmother's best friend since 1974, who ran the used bookstore over on Elm, stopped in with a jar of honey and stayed 10 minutes. Before she left, she caught my arm in the hallway. "You're the only one of them she ever talks about," Bea said. "You know that, I hope." Bing Crosby played on the kitchen radio, skipping the same beat it had skipped since 1997. Nobody fixed it. Nobody ever had. The turkey fat hissed in the pan, and my grandmother drew a small wooden box up from beside her chair and set it on the table where no one noticed. My grandmother handed out 5 identical envelopes that night, and by the time the roast had gone cold, 4 of them had been destroyed right in front of her. She waited until everyone had eaten. She stood up slowly, one hand braced on the back of her chair, and cleared her throat in that small, precise way she cleared it before a speech. My family kept talking. They always kept talking. "I have something I'd like to give each of you," she said. Wesley rolled his eyes at Sienna. Sienna rolled hers right back. My grandmother opened the wooden box. She lifted out 5 envelopes, cream-colored, unsealed, and carried each one around the table, setting it down beside its person. Mine came last. She rested her hand on my shoulder as she laid it down. My father opened his first, because my father opened everything first. I watched his face travel from expectation to confusion to something that clenched shut like a fist. Inside was a check. It was drawn on First National of Cedar Bluff. It was written out in my grandmother's slanted blue ink hand. It was for $5 million. Wesley laughed before he'd even read his own. He leaned across. He saw the number. He laughed harder. "Grandma, is this a joke? You making us play Monopoly?" Sienna giggled and held hers up to the light like a piece of costume jewelry. My mother's face did something strange. For a second, she looked like a child handed a kindness she had no idea how to hold. Then my father said, loud and flat, "It's fake. Don't be an idiot." He dropped his check onto his plate, gravy soaked into the corner. My mother tore hers in half, slowly, and set the 2 pieces down beside her wine glass. "Mother, really, it isn't funny." Wesley crushed his into a ball and flicked it under the table. And Sienna stood, walked to the fireplace, and dropped hers in. The flame took the paper by one corner, and I watched the number 5, with its 6 zeros trailing behind it, blacken and curl into a small red shape and vanish. My grandmother didn't blink. She looked only at me. I took mine. I folded it once and tucked it into the inside pocket of my purse. "Thank you, Grandma," I said. She nodded, just once. No one else saw. I drove home that night, gripping the wheel the way you grip a pew during a funeral hymn, because otherwise your hands will shake. The snow was coming down thick by then. The wipers kept an uneven rhythm, a right, then a left, half a beat off, that over 4 winters I'd learned to find comforting. I counted it as I drove. I did it the way Oliver, my 3rd grader, counted his fingers when the world got to be too much. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. My grandmother had watched 4 of her grandchildren and her own son mock her to her face, and she hadn't blinked. She had only looked at me. She wasn't senile. She was the sharpest person I had ever known. She read the Sunday paper front to back and left notes in the margins. She beat me at bridge every other week and bought me a bar of chocolate the weeks she didn't. She had once caught an error on my federal tax return from memory. And 2 weeks before Christmas, out in the garden, she had asked me a question that seemed at the time like just another one of her quiet, odd ones. "If you had $1 million, Ada, what would you do first?" I'd laughed. "I don't know. Buy new supplies for my class, probably. We're out of dry erase markers." She had nodded, the way you nod when someone gives the right answer on a test. At home, I laid the check on my kitchen table and stood over it under the yellow overhead light. The paper was heavy. When I tilted it, the security weave moved like oil across water. The routing number matched First National of Cedar Bluff, a building I'd walked past every working day of my life. The signature was hers, the same one I'd seen on every birthday card since I could read. I turned it over. On the back, in that same blue ink, in her slanted, unhurried hand, she had written, "For the one who still comes on Saturdays." I sat down on the kitchen floor. I sat there a long time. The check waited on the table above me. Outside, the snow did that thing it does at night, making everything muffled and far off and close all at once. In the morning, I would go to the bank, not to cash it, only to ask. The manager at First National of Cedar Bluff had known me since I was 16, and I had never seen his face go that color. His name was Walter Hensley. He had a mustache he'd kept since before mustaches came back around, and a small plastic horse on his desk I'd always assumed had been left there by some child who'd since grown up. He smiled when I came in. A minute later, he didn't. "Mr. Hensley, I'm sorry to bother you the day after Christmas." I took the check out. "I just wanted to verify this. My grandmother gave it to me last night, and I didn't—" I slid the paper across the desk. He looked at it. His smile faltered. Then something flickered behind his eyes, and he picked the check up with both hands, and his face did the thing I'd only ever read about in books. The color drained out of it. It went the pale of the inside of an envelope. "Ada." He said my name the way a doctor says it. "Can you come with me a minute?" He stood. He walked ahead of me, past the tellers, past the wreath hung on the vault, and opened the door of a small, windowless room with a long table. He held the door for me. He shut it. He turned the little latch. "Have a seat." "Is it real?" He sat across from me and folded his hands. He looked at the check, then at me, then at the check. "Ada," he said, "have you read what she wrote on the back?" "Yes." "Okay." He drew a breath. "Your grandmother came in the first week of November. She moved funds into a special account. She had 5 of these drafted. I was the one who put them on paper, Ada. They are as real as the chair you're sitting in. I counted backward from 10, the way I tell Oliver to. I looked at the little plastic horse on the corner of his desk. "Ma'am," Walter's voice went very professional. "I'm going to need you to stay seated. This is real. All of it is real." He paused. "And this is only part of it. There's an attorney named Ellsworth who's going to be in touch with you. I'm not supposed to say more than that." I walked out of that bank with $5 million in my account and a feeling, already, that it would not turn out to be the thing that changed my life that week. My grandmother had been a millionaire longer than I had been alive, and the only person in our entire family who had ever thought to ask about her financial advisor was the teller who once cashed her Social Security check. I drove straight from the bank to her house, still in my winter coat, the smell of photocopier paper and old coffee from Walter's back room still on my sleeve. She was in the kitchen. She had the coffee on. She was not surprised to see me. In 29 years, she had never once been surprised to see me. "You went to the bank?" "Yes." "Was Walter kind to you?" "He was terrified." She smiled into her cup. It was the chipped one with the cardinal on it, the one older than I was. She pushed a second one across to me. "Sit, sweetheart." I sat. "Your grandfather left me $400,000 in 1998, she said, "and a house and a garden. I had no idea what to do with any of it. I was 55. I'd been a music teacher for 30 years. I'd never bought a stock in my life. So I went to the library. I read. I wrote letters to a man in Chicago. He'd written a column in a magazine I liked. His name was Mr. Ellison. He wrote me back. We corresponded for 17 years. I never once met him. He died in 2015. She paused. He left me 40% of his firm. Grandma. I have roughly $40 million, Ada, give or take a market day. I set my coffee down. The cardinal on the cup regarded me with its one chipped eye. Why didn't you ever? Because nobody ever asked. She said it without a trace of bitterness, the way you'd report the weather. Your father asked me once, in 2003, whether I needed him to manage my money. I said no. He never asked again. He didn't ask because he wanted to help. He asked because he wanted to control. I am not obliged to hand my life over to someone who confuses the two. She reached across and squeezed my hand. I didn't give them money last night, Ada, she said. I gave them one last chance to ask me why, and they didn't ask. It took exactly 112 minutes for my family to stop calling that check fake and start calling it theirs. Walter had to make a compliance call. He called my father because my father was still listed on some old shared account from 20 years back. He gave my father no details, only that a wire had posted. It was enough. The first call came while I was still in my grandmother's kitchen, then another, then another. My phone, face down on the table, buzzed 32 times in 45 minutes. I counted because I couldn't think what else to do. Sienna's texts came in a flood. I need my check. I changed my mind. It was an accident. Ada, baby, can we talk? I have to pay my storage unit. You don't need that much. Be fair. Wesley's voicemail was louder. You give that back. That's family money, you little weasel. You hear me? My mother cried on hers. She cried the special way she cried, the soft, performed sob with a little hiccup at the end. Ada, sweetheart, you don't understand what you're doing to this family. I've been so patient. I've never once asked you for anything. I looked at my grandmother. She was calm. She was eating a slice of toast. She watched me with the mild attentiveness of a woman watching a storm she had already forecast. "I'm going to turn this off," I said. "Good." The knocking started 40 minutes later. My father. I saw his truck pull up through the kitchen window. He came up the walk at that pace he used when he was being reasonable on the outside and furious underneath. My grandmother rose slowly and walked to the front door. She didn't open it. She stood behind the glass. My father pounded. He tried the handle. "Mom, open the door!" "Gordon," she said through the glass, "it's the 26th of December. It isn't a good time." "You gave her $5 million! "I gave each of you $5 million. 4 of you destroyed it." "Mom, Gordon, go home." She didn't raise her voice. "I'll see you when I see you." And then she turned the lock, for the first time in 47 years. My father stood on the porch a long while. Then he left. My grandmother came back to the table and picked her toast up again. "Well," she said, "that's begun." The week my grandmother broke her hip was the week I stopped pretending I was going to get to keep her. It happened in the yard on a Tuesday in mid-January. She'd gone out to scatter seed for the cardinal and slipped on a patch of ice she couldn't see under the snow. She lay there 40 minutes until Bea, driving past on her way to the bookstore, noticed the front door standing half open and stopped. The hospital wanted to admit her. She wanted hospice at home. Hospice at home was what she got. She'd filled out the paperwork for it 3 months earlier, and Ellsworth had notarized it. I asked for a leave of absence from Willow Creek Elementary. The principal, a quiet woman named Mrs. Hartley, held my gaze a long moment across her desk and said, "You take whatever time you need, Ada. You come back when you come back." I moved into my grandmother's spare bedroom, the one with the pressed flowers on the wall and the quilt her own mother had sewn. I set a baby monitor on her nightstand. Milo, the gym teacher, a good man and nothing more, hauled my things over in his pickup and never asked me a single intrusive question. My father visited once. He stayed 20 minutes. He told my grandmother she ought to let Wesley bring her home. She said, "Gordon, I am home." He didn't come back. Every night I read to her. She loved Willa Cather, my Antonia most of all. It had been a wedding present from her mother. I read slowly. She'd close her eyes. Sometimes she corrected my pronunciation of a prairie town's name. Sometimes she slept. The honey lemon water on her nightstand would freeze along the rim overnight because the radiator was old and the walls were thin as paper. And every morning when I changed it, I'd notice, with a small, frightened tenderness, that my hand was smaller than hers had once been and would never grow that large. We had each shrunk in our own ways that winter. On a Thursday near the end, she asked me to open the top drawer of her dresser. Inside was a brass key on a leather loop. She placed it in my hand. "When Ellsworth calls you," she said, "give him this. He'll know what it opens." "Grandma, not yet." "Not yet, but soon, and that's all right." My grandmother died the way she had lived, on her own terms, without making a fuss, in a room that smelled of old books and wool. It was February 3rd, 2026, a Tuesday, at 5:47 in the morning. I know because I looked at the little travel clock she kept on the nightstand. It was the kind with a ticking second hand, a clock her husband had given her on their honeymoon in 1962, and it kept bad time, and she had never once replaced it. She'd been quiet for 2 days. The morning before, she had squeezed my hand and said, "Ada, I'm so proud of you." She hadn't spoken since. I'd been dozing in the chair. I woke because the furnace clicked off in the basement. It clicked off, and the house went very, very still, and I understood in a way that had nothing to do with my mind that she was gone. Her hand was in mine. It was still warm. I didn't cry right away. I sat a while. I listened to the morning. The radiator knocked once. The cardinal came to the feeder. He took a single seed. He flew off. Then I called Bee. She was there within the hour. She sat down beside the bed and took the other hand, the hand she'd been holding since 1974. I called my father next. He picked up on the fourth ring. I told him. He was quiet a moment, and then his voice cracked, and for a second I thought he might be human after all. Then my mother came on the line, and her first words were, "When's the funeral going to be, Ada? I've got a thing on the 10th. I hung up. The funeral was that Saturday. My grandmother had left written instructions. She wanted her corn yellow sweater. She wanted to be buried beside her husband in the little cemetery behind the Lutheran church she had never once attended. She wanted no eulogy from Gordon. She wanted me to read a poem. They all came. They wept loudly. My father wore a black suit that no longer fit him. My mother clung to his arm. Sienna filmed the procession from behind her sunglasses. I saw the video later, posted with a filter that softened all the edges. The caption said, "Healing." I filmed nothing. I didn't cry until that night. I want to stop right here for a second. If you've walked this far with me, if you've ever lost someone who loved you more than you ever believed you deserved, leave a comment below with their name, and follow Quiet Justice Stories so you don't miss the rest. I read every single comment, and I carry them with me. I'm asking because what comes next is the part I wasn't sure I had the strength to tell, and knowing you're here makes it easier. Stay with me. Let's go back. My father called the lawyer before the gravediggers had even finished their coffee. Ellsworth told me later, because Ellsworth tells you things in his own time, and because he was, among other things, funny. He said my father had left 3 voicemails by noon on the day of the funeral. All of them asked when the will would be read. Wesley came to my house the next evening. He walked in without knocking because we'd been raised in a house where nobody knocked. And he sat on the edge of my couch in his funeral suit and asked me, without any preamble, "Do you know who she left the house to?" "No, Wesley." "You were there every week. She must have said." "We didn't talk about it." "Come on, Ada." "We talked about my kids at school. We talked about her garden. We talked about bridge. I don't know what's in her will, and I don't care what's in her will." He looked at me a long moment, the way Wesley looks at people when he's trying to work out whether they're lying. Wesley has never been a good reader of people. He took a beer out of my fridge without asking and left. Ellsworth called me the following Monday. He was exactly as I remembered from the one time I'd met him at my grandmother's table. A tall, slow man in a gray suit with a voice like a cello string. "Miss Merrick, your grandmother retained me for many years. There will be a reading of her will at my office, February 20th, 10 in the morning. All immediate family is named. I'd like you there." "All right." He paused. "There's a safe deposit box here in my office that she arranged for. I'm going to ask you at that reading whether you have a key." "I have it." "Good." "Mr. Ellsworth, can I ask you something?" "You may." "Did she tell you what's in the will?" He was quiet a long time. "She did." "Is it going to surprise anyone?" He laughed once, a dry laugh. "Miss Merrick, it will surprise every single person in that room, except me, and you, and even you, I think, a little." The day of the reading was a Friday. I put on a gray dress. I drove into town carrying an assumption that was entirely wrong. My father used the exact same words when he heard the will that he'd used when he tore up the check. He said, "Is this a joke?" And then he said it again, a little louder, as though the room hadn't heard him. Ellsworth's conference room had a wood-paneled clock on the wall, and that clock ticked louder than any clock I have ever heard in my life. My father sat on one side of the table, my mother beside him, her hand on his sleeve, Wesley across from them, Sienna at the end, scrolling until Ellsworth asked her to put the phone in her purse. Bea sat beside me. I'd asked her to come. My grandmother had asked her to come too. Ellsworth opened a dark green folder. He put on his reading glasses. He didn't look at any of us. This is the last will and testament of Vivian Margaret Merrick, dated April 14th, 2022. Witnessed by Beatrice Lund and Dr. Naomi Adeyemi. Notarized in my presence. He read the preamble. He read the list of specific bequests, the cardinal teacup to me, the bridge set to Bea, the soldered star to the Lutheran church, the piano to the elementary school. My father's jaw was already set. The principal remainder of the estate, Ellsworth read, comprising the family residence at 114 Larkin Hollow Road, the surrounding 23 acres, all investment accounts, and all remaining personal effects, valued at approximately $40.2 million, net of the 5 gifts already distributed. The clock was very loud. The testator leaves in its entirety to her granddaughter, Ada Rosemary Merrick. Nobody spoke. The clock ticked. For a full 3 seconds, my father's face didn't change at all. Then he stood up. "Is this a joke?" "Mr. Merrick, please sit down." "Is this a joke?" "It is not a joke. It is a legal document. Please sit down." My mother let out a small sound, a sound like a teacup set down too hard. Wesley's eyes were fixed on me. Sienna had pulled her phone back out. Ellsworth read the attached reason clause in the same steady voice. "I leave this to my granddaughter Ada. She is the only one who came to see me on Saturdays. She came for no reason other than love. She cared for me at the end of my life. She never once asked me what I had." My father sat down. He stared at the table. Beside me, Bea took my hand under the table. I held on. The lawsuit arrived in the mail 4 days after the will was read, and I knew before I opened it which of them had been the one to type it up first. It was a heavy manila envelope. I smelled the paper. I don't know why. Stress does strange things. The paper smelled like paper, and like the lawyer's office it had come from, all toner and old leather, and both of those smells came through. The complaint had been filed on behalf of Gordon Merrick, Diane Merrick, Wesley Merrick, and Sienna Merrick Cole. The cause of action was undue influence. They were alleging that I had manipulated an elderly, ailing woman into signing her whole estate over to me. I sat down on my kitchen floor and laughed. It wasn't a good laugh. It was the laugh you make when the only other option is to throw something. I called Ellsworth. He'd been expecting it. "I'll represent you, Miss Merrick, free of charge. I owe your grandmother 3 decades of her trust. Let me finish what she started." I called Milo next. He was in his driveway scraping ice off his car, and he picked up on speaker. "Should I just settle, Milo? Give them something." He was quiet a second. I could hear the scrape of the ice. "Ada," he said, "you didn't do anything wrong, and your grandma knew exactly what she was doing. Giving in would be the one way to actually disrespect her." Okay. That was the whole call. That's the kind of friend Milo was. My father sent an email the next morning. Subject line, family meeting, body, Ada. We need to sit down. This has gone too far. Dad. I forwarded it to Ellsworth. Ellsworth replied on my behalf, polite, professional, referring all communication to his office. Sienna started posting veiled videos. She'd sit in her car, no makeup, and talk for 7 minutes about a family betrayal she couldn't get into for legal reasons. Her followers rallied. Stay strong, Queen. Family is everything. I'm so sorry, babe. I watched 2 of them. I didn't watch the third. My grandmother had been in the ground 18 days. The case wouldn't be heard until October. Ellsworth said probate moved slowly, and contested probate moved slower still. I was going to have to live for 7.5 months with my family's names on a lawsuit that had mine on it, too. I went back to work that Monday. Oliver was glad to see me. The safe my grandmother had given me the key to didn't hold stocks or deeds. It held proof that she had been paying attention. Ellsworth drove out to the house with me on a Saturday in May. The lilacs were just coming in. He walked through the rooms with the quiet respect of a man who had known the woman who'd lived in them. The safe sat at the back of her bedroom closet, behind a row of cardigans. He watched as I turned the brass key. Inside were 3 things. The first was a thick legal folder, the will, the notarizations, and 3 capacity evaluations Dr. Adeyemi had performed over the years. Every one of them clean, every one dated, every one signed. Ellsworth gave a small, grim smile. Your grandmother, he said, understood litigation. The second was a bundle of letters. Every birthday card I had ever sent her, starting with a crayon drawing from when I was 4. She had kept them all. She had labeled them by year in small pencil on the backs. The third was a leather album. I didn't know what it was at first. It was green, soft at the corners, bound with a shoelace she had replaced at least once. I opened it on the floor of her bedroom. It was a journal, a kind of journal. On each page in her slanted hand was a single entry, a date, a few words, sometimes a pressed leaf or a feather or a ticket stub. February 5th, 2015. Ada came. We read about the Nebraska prairie. She cried a little at the part with the plow. October 22nd, 2016. Ada came, brought apples, helped with the roof gutter. August 19th, 2018. Ada came, tired from her first week of teaching. We both napped. Every Saturday I had ever come, every single one, going back a decade, going back further than I'd realized I'd been coming. 487 entries. I counted them later, sitting on the bed. On page 112, there was a tea stain, a faint brown ring. Her note beneath it read, Ada brought pie. I spilled it. Much laughter. I cried for the first time since the funeral. I cried into my own sleeve on her bedroom floor, while Ellsworth stood in the hallway and pretended, kindly, to be admiring the view. I was not going to be alone in that courtroom. She had counted every Saturday. The judge who ruled on my grandmother's will had gone to high school with her in 1962, and she said so twice before the hearing even began. Her name was Judge Coraline Webb, and she routinely recused herself from cases where the relationship ran closer than passing acquaintance. She and my grandmother had been classmates in a graduating class of 51. That was acquaintance. She could hear the case. She announced it in open court, and my family's lawyer didn't object because he knew, I think, that he had nothing better to hold out for. Ellsworth was calm. He walked the judge through the will, the medical evaluations, the witness affidavits. Dr. Naomi Adeyemi took the stand in a Navy suit and spoke with the clean, board-certified precision of a woman who had testified before. She had evaluated my grandmother 3 times, once in 2022 at the signing of the will, once in 2023 as a follow-up, once in 2024 because my grandmother had insisted. All 3 evaluations found full testamentary capacity. The third had been performed 11 weeks before she died. B took the stand next. She wore her reading glasses and a small silver pin Vivian had given her for her 50th birthday. Your Honor, Vivian Merrick and I played bridge every Wednesday for 40 years. In her last week, she still remembered the hand I misplayed in September of 1987. She still teased me about it. B looked straight at my father as she said the next part. She was not influenced by anyone. She was the most unpersuadable person I have ever known. Then the family's lawyer cross-examined me. I'd been dreading it. I'd rehearsed. I needn't have. Miss Merrick, did you ever suggest to your grandmother how she should allocate her estate? No. Did you discuss her finances with her? No. I didn't even know she had any to speak of. Did you ever encourage her to favor you? No, sir. Then why, in your opinion, did she leave you everything? I hadn't been prepared for that question. I thought a moment. I looked at B. I looked at the empty seat beside her that no one had sat in. I came because it was Saturday, Your Honor, I said. That was the whole reason. The judge wrote something on her pad. I couldn't read it. She looked up. The court finds the will valid as executed. The contest is dismissed. Plaintiffs to bear defendants' reasonable attorney's fees. Ellsworth squeezed my shoulder once. I didn't look at my father. My father called me his worst daughter in front of a local journalist, and by Tuesday, the Cedar Bluff Chronicle had printed the phrase in a pull quote. It happened in the marble hallway outside courtroom 3. I was walking with Ellsworth toward the stairs. My father came out of the restroom on the far wall, and he saw me, and something he'd been holding for 9 months came loose. You are the worst daughter I have ever had, Ada. His voice bounced. Marble is unkind to anger. 3 people turned their heads, including a young woman with a notepad and a press badge from the Chronicle. She didn't look away. She made a small, deliberate note. I didn't answer. I kept walking. Beside me, Ellsworth set a hand on my elbow and steered me gently past. Wesley followed. Don't you feel guilty? He said behind me, not quite shouting. I stopped. I turned. Wesley had been my older brother for 34 years. He had shoved me into a pool when I was 6. He had helped me move 3 times. He had borrowed money and never paid it back. He had turned up for Thanksgiving without calling. He had stood at our grandmother's coffin with dry eyes. No, Wesley, I said. Not even a little. Sienna had been live streaming from inside the courtroom. The bailiff had asked her twice to put the phone away. She had ignored him both times. Her video was pulled by the platform within an hour for violating the rules on broadcasting in court. According to a comment she made afterward, she lost 7,000 followers in a single afternoon. She had crossed the line from grieving family member to embarrassing spectacle in front of an audience that had been paying her. I drove home that afternoon and sat in the cold kitchen and drank tea. Milo came by with dinner he didn't pretend to have cooked. We ate in silence. The Chronicle piece ran Tuesday morning. The headline was measured. Probate court upholds contested will in Merrick estate. The body was factual, but there was a pull quote. My father's words, verbatim, boxed on the second page. And there was a small detail I didn't catch at first, tucked into the closing paragraph. Mr. Merrick was laid off from his position at a regional parts manufacturer earlier this year. The manufacturer announced its closure in March. It wasn't a vindictive detail. It was a reporter doing her job, but it ran in a town that reads every word. A small town has a long memory, especially for people who burn money in front of the dying. My mother's spa had a grand opening banner that had been hanging there for 2 years, faded pink, drooping off one corner of the awning. It started losing clients in the 3rd week of November. Not all at once. A Tuesday regular stopped booking, then a Friday regular. The woman who owned the flower shop across the street, who had once sung in the choir with my grandmother, walked past the spa for 3 weeks without so much as glancing in. My mother called me in December, crying, and asked whether I could help. I said no, gently, and she hung up. Wesley's construction office, the one he'd been running out of a rented corner of a warehouse, was repossessed in late January. He was 3 months behind on the rent. The landlord, who'd gone to school with my father, had been patient. The paper ran the filing in the back section, the way it ran all the filings. People read the back section. My father never found another job. He applied at 3 places, not one called him back. He was 58. He'd spent 30 years at a single manufacturer, and out on the job market he was a species that had been declared extinct. My mother moved back in with her sister in Ohio that November. My father stayed on in the house I'd grown up in. He didn't invite anyone over. And then there was Sienna. The story the Chronicle had printed got picked up, briefly, modestly, by a regional human interest blog, which led to a follow-up comment thread, which led to a woman in another town messaging Sienna's husband, Trevor, about certain credit card balances belonging to a certain wife that seemed out of line with the household income. Trevor, who had been suspecting something for a year, checked. He found $80,000 of debt Sienna had been hiding. He filed for divorce in April. By the end of May, Sienna had moved in with my mother in Ohio. By then, she'd lost around 12,000 followers, and whatever leverage she'd once mistakenly imagined she held over our father. Milo and I were at his kitchen table when I read the text from B telling me about the divorce. Milo looked at me. I looked at him. "You didn't do this," he said. "I know." We sat with it anyway. The thing about my grandmother that nobody in our family ever bothered to learn was that she had been quietly feeding their children's school for 40 years. I found out on a warm Saturday in May, going through her desk. I had decided not to sell the house. I couldn't. I'd told B, who'd been running her bookstore out of a cramped storefront on Elm, that she could have the front 2 rooms for a second location. She had cried, and then agreed, and then brought over boxes. We were clearing drawers together when I found the notebook. It was small, soft leather, bound with an old brown shoelace. It slid out from behind the drawer liner in the bottom right of her desk, the kind of hiding place you use when you don't want to be caught being kind. I opened it. Every page was a year. Each year had a line. 1985. Milk program, $840. 1986. Milk, $900. Textbooks, $1,200. 1987. Milk, $950. Library, $400. It went on for 40 years. The last entry was November of 2025. Milk, books, a new set of drums for the music classroom. The running total at the bottom, in her steady hand, was $284,600. Willow Creek Elementary. My school. The school I taught at. The school where Oliver, my third grader who wouldn't speak in group work, drank a small carton of milk at every lunch because it was part of what the school called the nutrition program. The program that was fully funded year after year by a private, anonymous donor no one had ever met. I sat down on the floor of her kitchen and put the notebook in my lap and didn't move for an hour. A pressed leaf slid out of the back cover, an oak leaf. Beneath it she had written, Gordy's first day, October 1984. I didn't know who Gordy was. I asked B later. B looked at me a long moment and said, Your father. He'd been a kindergartner. My grandmother had started feeding that school the year after her son first walked into it. She had fed it straight through his childhood, his adolescence, his graduation, his marriage, his children, his grandchildren. She had fed the school that had fed all of us, and she had never told a single one of us, including the one who spent her own days teaching inside it, the one she'd been keeping in dry erase markers for a decade without ever knowing. My mother sat at my kitchen table that February and looked, for the first time in my life, like someone who was not performing. She had come without calling. She'd taken a bus from Ohio and walked the last mile from the station through the slush in a coat that had been expensive 6 years ago and was now just a coat. She knocked on my door the way a stranger knocks, twice, soft. I let her in. I made tea. I didn't say very much. She had lost weight, not the way she used to diet, loud and announced. She had lost it the way grief loses it for you. Her hands shook on the cup. I read her letter, she said. Okay. The one Mr. Ellsworth gave me after the reading. I didn't open it until last month. I couldn't. Okay? She tried to drink and set the cup down because she was crying silently now, the new way. She said she remembered a specific Tuesday in 1994, before you were born. She'd come over, and I'd been short with her. She said she understood. Her own mother-in-law had been difficult with her. She didn't want to pass that down. My mother's voice broke, and she said, I forgive you, Diane. I have forgiven you for 30 years. My mother put her head down on her arms on my kitchen table. I let her cry. I didn't pat her shoulder. I didn't tell her it was okay. I just made another pot of tea. When she looked up, her makeup was gone, and her face looked the way it must have looked before I was born. And for a second, I was looking at a version of my mother I had never met. Ada, I'd never ask, but the spa, 100,000. I could save it. I'd pay it back. I would. I looked at her. I didn't feel angry. I felt, honestly, nothing sharp, just a kind of tired tenderness. Mom, I said, I'm not giving you money. She nodded. She'd expected me to say it. But I'm going to set up a fund, I said, in her name, for college, for any grandchild I might have someday, and for any child in Cedar Bluff who needs it. That's what I'm going to do with her money. That's what she'd have wanted. She nodded again. She stood. She hugged me, small, for 1 second. Then she left. I'm not angry anymore, Mom, I said at the door. I just don't know you. She didn't turn around, but she nodded. I gave notice at Willow Creek Elementary on a Tuesday, and by Friday I had rented a small cottage in a town in Maine I had never once set foot in. Mrs. Hartley didn't try to talk me out of it. She'd known me for 4 years. She'd watched me come back from leave. She'd watched me get through a trial. She'd watched me keep teaching a room full of 9-year-olds as if the ground weren't shifting under my feet every single morning. She took my resignation with a small, dry nod and said, "You'll be a good teacher wherever you go, Ada. You already are." I set up the foundation with Ellsworth, $20 million, the Vivian Merrick Scholarship Fund. It would cover tuition, books, and milk for any student who needed it, from elementary school through college, anywhere in Cedar Bluff County. Ellsworth wept quietly in his office when I signed the papers. It was the only time I ever saw him weep. He had loved her. I'd always known. I didn't sell the house. I couldn't. I deeded the right to use it to be for the rest of her life. For the bookstore. She named the new branch Vivian's Second Reading. She painted the sign herself. I applied for a 4th-grade position at an elementary school in Harrow Cove, Maine, a town I'd picked out of a road atlas because the name sounded like something my grandmother would have liked. I didn't visit first. I did a phone interview. They offered me the job 2 days later for $51,200 a year, which was the salary I had always had and the salary I intended to keep having. My father called once, in June. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message asking whether we could meet, just the two of us, just for coffee. He said there were things he wanted to say. I listened to it 3 times. Then I wrote him a single email. "Dad, I'm not going to stop loving the people you should have been, but I can't keep writing the letter for you. Take care of yourself, Ada." I didn't send any of the versions where I tried to explain further. I didn't send the version where I forgave him. I couldn't lie to him, even now. I packed what fit in my car. It fit in my car. The first cup of coffee I drank in Maine was the worst cup of coffee I have ever had, and I laughed out loud in the parking lot. I had driven 2 days, through New Hampshire, along the edge of Vermont, up the long, slow climb into Maine. The Subaru had a cough in 4th gear I'd been pretending wasn't getting worse for 3 years. I had the corn yellow sweater on the passenger seat beside me, folded, because I hadn't been able to bring myself to pack it in a box. I stopped at a roadside gas station somewhere south of Augusta. They had coffee in a pot that looked like it had been there since the Carter administration. I bought a cup. I drank it. It was, objectively, a disgrace. I stood in the parking lot and laughed, a real laugh, the kind I hadn't managed in a year, and startled a man putting air in his tire. I reached Harrow Cove in the late afternoon. The town was small the way small towns are small. 1 main street, a post office, 2 diners, a feed store that had become a yarn store, a bakery that closed on Tuesdays. The cottage I'd rented sat on a bluff half a mile out. Gray clapboard, a weathered porch with 2 rocking chairs, one of them missing a spindle. The landlord had left the key under the flower pot, as promised. I unlocked the door and stood in the hall. The cottage smelled of cedar and of the sea. It was empty. It was quiet. The kitchen had a cast iron stove I didn't yet know how to use. The living room had 1 window that faced the Atlantic and a small, uneven floor that creaked when I crossed it. I carried the corn yellow sweater into the living room and draped it over the arm of the 1 chair that was already there, a green wingback the last tenant had left behind. The sleeve hung down over the arm the way it used to hang over the arm of my grandmother's kitchen chair. I stood and looked at it a long time. In the mailbox that evening was a single envelope, Bee's handwriting. Inside was a card and a short letter. "Ada, Vivian knew you'd end up somewhere like this. She told me 10 years ago. She said, 'Ada is a coastal soul. It just hasn't told her yet. Welcome home, Bee.'" By the following June, I had a fourth-grade classroom that faced the Atlantic, and a yellow cat who was convinced my grandmother's sweater belonged to him. The classroom was on the second floor of Harrow Cove Elementary, a brick building from 1936 with floors that squeaked in 8 specific spots, all of which my students learned to skip over on their way to the pencil sharpener. My class had 18 kids. One of them was a quiet girl named Wren who wouldn't speak in group work. I gave her patience. I gave her Saturdays in the form of 20 extra minutes after school on Tuesdays. By May, she had started raising her hand. The first awards from the Vivian Merrick Scholarship Fund went out in April. 47 students. I read every application. 2 of them were children from the Willow Creek Milk Program, the one my grandmother had been quietly funding since before they were born. I cried, quietly, over both files, and I signed both approvals. Bee drove up in early June with a mason jar of jam from the garden. She stayed 3 days. She sat on my porch and read a paperback and said no more than was needed. She was 80 years old. She looked, out on that porch, like a woman who had decided to live to 100 out of pure spite. My father sent me a birthday card on the 14th of July. It was the first birthday card he had sent me in 10 years. The card itself was generic. Happy birthday, daughter. Inside, in his cramped handwriting, he had written 4 words. I hope you're well. I didn't write back. I didn't tear it up either. I put it in a drawer in the kitchen. I don't know why. I think someday I'll know. The cat turned up in late June, skinny and yellow, with a torn ear and a steady, skeptical way of looking at a person. He walked in through the screen door I hadn't latched properly. He climbed onto the corn-yellow sweater on the wingback and went to sleep. I didn't have the heart to move him. I named him Marlowe. He slept on that sweater every night. Every morning I had to ask his permission to borrow it. He'd look at me with one half-open yellow eye, as though he had inherited the memory directly and was merely tolerating my use of it on loan. On a Saturday in August, I sat on the porch that belonged to me and wrote a letter that didn't need to be mailed. The sun was going down over the bay, 10 minutes later than it had ever gone down behind my grandmother's hill. I'd been keeping track of that for some reason. I sat through all 10 of those extra minutes that night, the way you sit through the credits of a film you don't want to end. The letter was to her. I told her about the classroom, about Wren, about the 8 squeaky floorboards, about the day the principal brought donuts, about Marlowe and the sweater and the way he looked at me. I told her I'd figured something out. I hadn't won because I had money. I had money now, and most of it was not mine and never would be. I had won because I had known, when it mattered, how to sit still beside a person who was leaving. Because I had come on Saturdays for no reason at all. Because I'd put the check in my purse instead of the fire. Because when she'd asked me, out in her garden in October, what I would do with $1 million, I had said I'd buy dry erase markers for my class. And she had looked at me the way a person looks at an answer they've been waiting their whole life to hear. I folded the letter. I put it in the small wooden box she'd kept beside her chair on Christmas Eve, the one I'd carried with me to Maine. I closed the lid. I stood up. Marlowe, through the open window, watched me with the patient disdain of a creature who is ready for his dinner. "Coming," I said, and I went inside. If this story reached you, if there has been someone anywhere in your life who loved you more than you knew how to receive it, tell me in the comments below. Tell me their name and what they taught you about quiet kindness. I read every one, and I carry them with me. And if you want another story about boundaries, inheritance, and the women who choose to walk instead of stay, the next one is waiting for you, and it begins, once again, with a check. Subscribe to Quiet Justice Stories and come with me.